Check 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Check 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
Morning, Elise. I was just telling our
Women seem to dominate.
they do. I'm going to call to order the Subcommittee on Readiness of the House Armed Services Committee. Mr. Crumpler said he will blow reveille for us this morning, so I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us this morning. I'd like to thank our committee members. I want to thank all of our witnesses again for taking time to join us today. This is an important hearing determining where we are currently with the state of readiness and the challenges that we have before us. And this morning we have with us General Daniel Allen, Vice Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, Admiral Michelle Howard, Vice Chief of Naval Operations, General Larry Spencer, Vice Chief of the United States Air Force, Vice Chief of Staff, General John Paxton, Assistant Commandant, United States Marine Corps. Folks, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. Thanks for your perspective and for your service to our nation. As we know, for the past 3 years, the Readiness Subcommittee has held a number of briefings and hearings on the state of readiness in our armed forces. Without exception, we've heard time and time again from our witnesses, both here with us this morning and from others, that our readiness is in peril. We're also challenged in our ability to meet combatant commander demands and to restore readiness to any level that any of us believe is acceptable. We've also heard about the self-inflicted damage that we have placed upon this nation's capacity to deal with potential adversaries done by the sequester. Chairman Dempsey characterized our situation at our Armed Services Committee retreat as being on the ragged edge, and he even stated that the President's budget still puts us just at that ragged edge. He warned that we're moving toward a military that is challenged to execute the most basic strategic requirement of the U.S. military, defeating an enemy in a single major theater operation, and this, to all of us, is unacceptable. I believe, as I'm sure you do, that we're critically challenged today in our ability to perform steady state missions and simultaneously respond to an unforeseen contingency. I also remain concerned that even at the President's budget levels of funding, we accept too much risk. And I believe that there is a lack of understanding of what risk entails, being able to bring to bear too little, too late, and with increased casualties, and possibly even the inability to accomplish the mission. That is a place where we do not want to be. We've seen ourselves in that place at other times in this nation's history, and by any measure, it's unacceptable. I do look forward to this morning's briefing and learning where we are today in terms of overall readiness, and I hope that our witnesses can touch on the risk inherent in the fiscal year 2016 budget and provide some specific examples of challenges in matching ready and available forces to what the department referred to in the budget materials as severe deployment demands. I would like now to turn to our ranking member, Ms. Madeline Bordallo, for her opening comments. Madeline, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses too. And we were briefed in our offices, and I appreciate your coming to see me and, of course, the chairman as well. We all appreciate the great sacrifices that every service member makes when joining the armed forces. At today's hearing, we are making sure that Congress is providing the right resources to support our service members, especially in regard to their overall readiness. However, we hold this hearing on the day after we voted for a budget resolution that undermines defense and uses gimmicks to act like we're truly have boasted defense spending. The budget resolution that this House passed effectively continues sequestration. The budget resolution will inhibit the Department of Defense's ability to effectively plan and program for future years, a shortcoming that numerous defense officials have lambasted before the committee these past years. we have neglected to do our very basic job of providing adequate funding for our military. We convened this hearing at a time when the world and this country face seemingly countless challenges to our very way of life. We face challenges in the Asia-Pacific with an erratic dictator in North Korea whose every move seems to challenge our status quo and has been quite provocative at times. The Chinese continue to foster instability in the South China Seas with development of man-made islands and continue to challenge Japan's sovereignty over the Senkaku Islands. Russia continues to foster instability in Ukraine and may be trying to provoke problems in other Baltic and Scandinavian nations. Most visible are the atrocities of the ISIL and their barbaric actions against all people, including fellow Muslims. And I mention all this knowing there are also challenges in Africa and other regions of the world. Although we ramped down from more than a decade of war, we find ourselves in a world that remains dynamic and challenging. U.S. leadership is needed across the globe, and we cannot neglect our obligation and commitments to our allies. Unfortunately, I fear that the budget resolution this House passed yesterday undermines our ability to project power and maintain commitments to our allies. We all know that when sequestration hit in 2013, most of the cuts were taken from the operation and maintenance accounts. The effect of these cuts is still being felt today, and in the FY16 budget request, we know that only about 50% of the Air Force's fighter squadrons are ready to meet their operational requirements. General Odinero has indicated that the Army's readiness is at its lowest level in 20 years. That is just a small sampling of the very real readiness challenges that we face today, due in great part to sequestration and the lack of predictable budgets that would allow the department to plan and program for the rest of the years. And I hope that our witnesses today can comment on the impact of having a sequestration level base budget with increases in the OCO account. What impact will this have on the readiness of our forces? Will we be able to execute that funding within the constraints that exist on the obligation of funds in that account? How does cementing sequestration levels in the base budget impact planning for the future years? Further, I hope that our witnesses can speak out on what would happen to future budgets additional OCO funding were not provided to offset a sequestration-based budget. What impact would this have on the readiness of our forces? And can you provide specific examples of where we would take significant risk and what capabilities would we simply lose? Today's hearing is an important opportunity to educate this subcommittee, but more importantly, our colleagues on other committees about the very real readiness challenges that we face. And I hope that our witnesses will help us understand the problems that we've created in funding the base budget at sequestration levels and providing additional funds in OCO. Unfortunately, I fear this testimony will fall on deaf ears, and we will continue to allow ideology to drive our military's funding and undermine our military's readiness. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bordalia. I'm going to go now to Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will pass. I didn't realize I had an opening statement.
Oh, no, well, we're going to go right into questions.
Right into questions, okay, thank you.
Pass by my questions. I'm going to defer to the committee members, and I'll go ahead and ask last, just so that we can make sure we get to our committee members.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Thanks for the clarification.
Sure.
Thank you to all of the witnesses who are here today. Thank you for your service. I wanted to ask about the long-term impacts of severe deployment demands. I represent the 10th Mountain Division based at Fort Drum, and especially as we continue to draw down end strength, what are we doing to enable units more time to train and regain full spectrum readiness? And how does the FY16 budget support that effort?
Climb to glory, ma'am. General Allen here, and I'll speak partly to the 10th Mountain Division that I know you know very well from your visits there at Fort Drum, but more broadly to the United States Army as a whole. Quite frankly, as we reduce our end strength on the current ramp toward 450,000, it does increase the demands on our trained and ready forces. And so our goal is to get to a point where we're at a dwell to deployment ratio of 1 to 2. Right now, if you do not factor in our Pacific-based forces that we have protected from global deployments by and large so that they can stay focused in that critical region of the world, our dwell to deployment ratio for the rest of our brigade combat teams, like the 10th Mountain Division, is at 1 to 1.6. And so we are well below the what we consider to be the sustainable level. And you've highlighted exactly why it is so important. We need time to restore full spectrum readiness as we come back from these important missions that we're supporting for the nation around the globe. And I know that you're aware that we have about 140,000 U.S. Army soldiers forward deployed, forward stationed, and performing missions in about 140 countries as we speak this morning. And so I hope that addresses your specific question in terms of why it is so important that we fund the budget at a minimum to the President's budget, because it is absolutely the minimum that we can continue to meet the current demands. And quite frankly, we are consuming readiness as fast as we're generating it today. And so we are not building surge capacity. We are not building a contingency response capability like you spoke to.
Thank you, Congresswoman. For the Navy, the core piece to our readiness is our capital ships. And we have had extended deployments over the last 15 years. We're trying to go back to a normalized deployment of 7 months, but for the last 15 years, they've been 8, 9, 10 months. So we have to reset those ships. We had to stretch out and sometimes not do the maintenance avails, which is the very first phase of getting a capital ship ready to to upload the crew or to bring on board the Marines. With this particular budget, we are still in reset, taking those ships through dry docking, through overhauls, all the way up through fiscal year 18 for our carrier strike groups. And then we don't reset and recover the maintenance on our amphibious ships till fiscal year 20. So for us, these platforms are the way we project power, and they have got to be go through overhaul and to recover from the high op tempo that we placed them under during the last 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And for the Marine Corps, the story is almost identical. We are consuming readiness faster than we can generate it. To your specific question, ma'am, we in the Marine Corps, we believe we're the nation's 911 force, a crisis response force. We have every expectation that we will be forward deployed. But right now, our depth to dwell is less than a 1 to 2. It's at 1 to 2 overall. That's the way we advertise. That's the way we testify. We have certain critical communities. Right now, some of our infantry battalions, our refueling squadrons, some of our fixed-wing squadrons that are less than a 1 to 2, as General Allen just mentioned. In an optimal world, we'd like to get to 1 to 3. The challenge with being at a 1 to 2 over a sustained period is exactly what you said. We will be ready for the crisis. You will have ready Marine units on ships with aircraft ready to go into harm's way to fight tonight to do exactly what the nation needs. The challenge is that the next to deploy will be in a degraded state of readiness. Right now we have over 50% of our home station units in what we call degraded readiness, C3 or C4. They don't have the proper equipment. They don't have the right skilled leadership at the small unit level. They don't have the right training opportunities. And this is dependent on O&M dollars, on TOA, on fixed allocation of resources. Right now, under a BCA cap, that will continue to get worse. It's been bad since 2013. We are still feeling the effects of our fixed-wing depot maintenance in our flight rehab facilities, and in our shipyards, in our federal shipyards, where the artisans left, the people were furloughed, the equipment was not being maintained, and we're still in a downward spiral from 2013 right now. So if the BCA caps continue, you can expect that to get exacerbated. Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, Congresswoman. So the crux of your question is really a good one, and that is, what are we doing to reduce our dwell so that our folks can come back and become full spectrum trained? The problem is we're not, and because the ops tempo has not dropped. And like the other services, the reason that really puts us in such a bind is because if you think about the capacity we have and the age of the systems that we have, that's really where all the stress is. To give you some specifics, you know, during Operation Desert Storm in the Air Force, we had 134 combat fighter squadrons. Today we have 55. We're on our way to 49. To give you some additional perspective, during Desert Storm, when we had that 134 fighter squadrons, we deployed 33 of those to Desert Storm. So think about now, today we have 54. If we had Desert Storm today, what the impact would be. Our tankers are 52 years old, bombers 50 years old. Our fourth generation fighters are on average 25 years old. My colleagues here sometimes accuse me of being a pilot back during the B-17, but the reason they do that is because of this statement, which is true. And think about this, though, in 1999, if we had used the B-17 bomber to strike targets in Baghdad during the first Gulf War, it would have been younger than the B-52, the KC-135, and the U-2 are today. So if you couple the stress of deployments, the ops tempo, the deploy to dwell, with the reduced capacity and the age of our fleets, that in essence is where we are.
Thank you very much. I'm over my time. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, for the flexibility.
No problem. Thank you. I want to remind our witnesses that your full statements are going to be entered into the record. And if you'd like at this time, you can make a brief opening statement in the summary of that, and then we'll go to Ms. Bordallo. General Allen?
We're very flexible,
Yes, indeed.
Chairman. Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the readiness of your United States Army. On behalf of our Secretary, the Honorable John McHugh, and our Chief of Staff, General Ray Odierno, I thank you for your support and demonstrated commitment to our soldiers, Army civilians, families, and veterans. There are over 140,000 soldiers committed around the globe, partnered with our allies in response to increasing instability across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Pacific, continuing the mission in Afghanistan, and reacting to humanitarian crises. The velocity of instability is increasing, and now is not the time to drastically reduce our capability and capacity. The Army needs Congress to provide adequate, consistent, and predictable funding. Today, only 33% of our brigades are ready, when our sustained readiness rate should be closer to 70%. The FY15 enacted funding for our Army is $5.1 billion less than last year's budget, and challenges our commanders and leaders across our Army to sustain our hard-fought gains in readiness. We are funded to achieve just enough readiness for immediate consumption, and are unable to generate the readiness required to respond to an emerging contingency. While the FY15 budget constrains training, we remain committed to our combat training center rotations to develop leaders and build unit readiness. We accept risk in home station training to conserve resources for the combat training centers. The result of this approach is that units arrive at our combat training centers not fully trained and ready for these complex training scenarios, and therefore unable to derive the full benefit of the training that's provided. Under the President's budget in FY16, our goal is to increase regular Army Brigade Combat Team readiness to 70%, allowing us to balance force requirements while maintaining some surge capacity. But we need consistent resources to get there. Sequestration will undermine readiness, ultimately putting soldiers' lives at risk and will increase significantly the involuntary separation of officer and non-commissioned officer leaders who have steadfastly served their country through the last 13 years of war. Sequestration will also severely impact our ability to maintain our installation readiness and protect the industrial base, both key components to maintaining a ready force. It will cut essential funds for military construction, sustainment, restoration, and modernization on our installations. Sequestration will degrade the industrial base's ability to sustain the life cycle readiness of warfighting equipment while also maintaining the capability to surge to meet future demands. To achieve our required readiness level in fiscal year 16, we need Congress to support all of the cost-saving measures the Army has proposed. These include compensation reform, a new round of base realignment and closure, and the Aviation Restructure Initiative. Aviation Restructure eliminates 700 aircraft from the active component and 111 from the Guard and Reserve, but increases readiness and saves $12 billion. If the Army does not execute ARI, we will incur additional costs buying aircraft and performing maintenance at the expense of modernizing our systems and maintaining readiness for our heroic total force aviators. The Army remains committed to protecting our most important resource, our soldiers, civilians, and families. We build leaders of character and trusted professionals who provide an environment where every member of our great Army is treated with dignity and respect, supported by essential soldier and family programs. We will protect our most vital programs, but sequestration-driven budget cuts affect every facet of our Army. I thank you again for your steadfast support of the outstanding men and women of the United States Army, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Allen. Admiral Howard.
Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Bordallo, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. It is my honor to represent the Navy's active and reserve sailors and civilians, and particularly the 41,000 sailors who are underway and deployed around the world today. They are standing the watch right now and ready to meet today's security challenges. The citizens of this nation can take great pride in the daily contributions of their sons and daughters who fulfill our Navy's long-standing mandate to be where it matters, when it matters. And recent events exemplify the benefit of forward presence. Last August, the George Herbert Walker Bush Carrier Strike Group relocated 750 nautical miles from the Arabian Sea to the Arabian Gulf in less than 30 hours to respond to ISIL attacks in Iraq. They executed 20 to 30 combat sorties per day, and for 54 days, they were the only coalition strike option to project power against ISIL. I want to make it clear, the fiscal year 16 budget is the minimum funding required to execute the nation's defense strategy. In other words, if we return to a sequestered budget, we will not be able to execute the defense strategic guidance. Past budget shortfalls have forced us to accept significant risk in two important mission areas. The first mission at risk is deter and defeat aggression, which means to win a war in one theater while deterring another adversary in a different theater. Assuming risk in this mission leads to a loss of credibility and the ability to assure our allies of our support. The second mission at risk is to project power despite anti-access aerial denial challenges. This brings risk in our ability to win in war. Some of our people and platforms will arrive late to the fight and inadequately prepared. They will arrive with insufficient ordnance and without the modern combat systems, sensors, and networks required to win. Ultimately, this means more ships and aircraft out of action, more sailors, Marines, and merchant Marines killed. Our Navy will continue to ensure the security of the maritime domain by sustaining its forward presence, warfighting focus, and readiness preparations to continue operating where it matters and when it matters. Since there is no foreseeable reduction to global maritime requirements, we have focused our fiscal year 16 Navy budget to address the challenges to achieving the necessary readiness to execute our missions. Any funding below this submission requires a revision of the defense strategy. So to put it simply, sequestration will gravely damage the national security of our country. Despite these challenges, we are fortunate to have the highest quality, most diverse force in my Navy history. These outstanding men and women who serve our nation at sea make us the finest Navy in the world. So on behalf of all those active and reserve sailors and our civilians and their families, I extend our appreciation to this committee for your efforts and your continued support to keep our Navy ready to defend this nation.
Admiral Howard, thank you. General Paxton?
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Boydillo, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate having the opportunity to appear before you today and to report on the readiness of your United States Marine Corps. Today, as always, your Marine Corps is committed to remaining our nation's ready force, a force that's truly capable of responding to a crisis anywhere around the globe at a moment's notice. I know that this committee and the American people have high expectations of your Marines. You expect your Marines to operate forward, to stay engaged with our partners, to deter potential adversaries, and to respond to crises. And when we fight, you always expect us to win. You expect a lot of your Marines, and you should. As we gather today, more than 31,000 Marines are forward deployed and forward engaged. They're doing just what you and we expect them to be doing. Our role as our nation's ready force continues to inform how we man, train, and equip the Marine Corps. It also prioritizes the allocation of the resources that we receive from Congress. And I can assure you that your forward deployed Marines are indeed well-trained, well-led, and well-equipped. In fact, our readiness was proven last year as your Marine Corps supported recent evacuations of American citizens in South Sudan, in Libya, and in Yemen. Those ready forces are also currently engaged in the Middle East and conducting strike operations against ISIL in Syria and Iraq. They're training the Iraqi army units and they're protecting our embassy compound in Baghdad. They also routinely deploy and exercise across the Asia-Pacific region, where over 21,000 are currently west of the international date line. All of these events demonstrate the reality and the necessity of maintaining a combat-ready force that's capable of handling today's crisis today. Such an investment is essential to maintaining our nation's security and our prosperity for the future. While we work hard with you in order to maintain the readiness of all our forward deployed forces, we have not sufficiently invested in our home station readiness and our next to deploy forces. We have also underfunded or delayed full funding for modernization, for infrastructure sustainment, and for some of our quality of life programs. As a result, approximately half of our non-deployed units are suffering personnel, equipment, or training shortfalls. Ultimately, this has created an imbalance in our overall institutional readiness. At the foundation of our readiness, we will emphasize, and we do emphasize, that all Marines and all units are physically and mentally ready, are fully equipped, and have sufficient time to train at home station with quality small unit leaders at the helm. They are thus ready to go anywhere when they are called. As we continue to face the possibility of full implementation of the Budget Control Act, our future capacity for crisis response, as well as major contingency response, is likely to be significantly reduced. Quite simply, if our home station units are not ready due to a lack of training, manning, or equipment, it could mean a delayed response to resolve that contingency or to execute an operational plan, both of which would consider and create unacceptable risk for our national defense strategy, as well as risks to the limits of mission accomplishment or perhaps physical risk to the force itself. The readiness challenges we already see today provide context for our messages this morning. Your United States Marine Corps can indeed meet the requirements of the Defense Strategic Guidance with the President's budget, but there is no margin. As the Chairman stated, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, several weeks ago, even under PB-16, we are already at the ragged lower edge for overall readiness. I thank each of you for your faithfulness to our nation, your support for the Department and our services. I request that the written statement be submitted for the record, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you, sir.
Very good. Thank you, General Paxton. General Spencer?
Good morning, Chairman Whitman and Ranking Member Boydillo, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your continued support of America's airmen and their families, and for the opportunity to share the Air Force's current readiness posture. The United States Air Force is the most globally engaged Air Force on the planet, and our airmen are defending the nation through a wide spectrum of activities, from dropping bombs and flying space assets to delivering humanitarian relief and protecting the homeland. We remain the best Air Force in the world, but with recent budget cuts, coupled with 24 years of combat operations, it has taken its toll. Our airmen have always been and will always be the cornerstone of the Air Force, and the combatant commanders tell us that our airmen continue to perform exceptionally well across the entire globe. However, we are the smallest and oldest Air Force we have ever been, while the demand for air power continues to climb. This is not a complaint. We're happy that what we bring to the table is recognized as indispensable when it comes to meeting the nation's objectives. But I am concerned. I am more concerned today than I was at my last testimony. We have to modernize to maintain our technological advantage, and this is something we've set aside over the last few years. Our potential enemies or adversaries have been watching us and now know what it takes to create the best Air Force in the world. They are investing in technologies and doing everything they can to reduce our current air power advantage. Because we have the smallest and oldest Air Force in history, we need all of our airmen to be proficient in every aspect of their mission. Unfortunately, our high operations tempo has caused our airmen to only be proficient in the jobs they do when they deploy. We simply do not have the time and resources to train airmen across the full spectrum of Air Force missions. I'm confident that with your help we can reverse this trend and regain our readiness, but we will have to make some difficult choices to balance capacity, capability, and readiness, all of which have been already cut to the bone. Our FY16 President's Budget Submission aims to balance critical operational training and modernization commitments, but even at this level, it will take years to recover lost readiness. We have already delayed major modernization efforts, cut manpower, and reduced training dollars. One final point, the capability gap that separates us from the other Air Forces is narrowing. That gap will close even faster under BCA levels of funding. When sequestration first hit in 2013, we saw the domino effect it had on our pilots, maintainers, weapons loaders, air traffic controllers, and our fighter and bomber squadrons. Readiness levels of those central combat operations plummeted. In short, we were not fully ready, and we cannot afford to let that happen again. To quote a young C-17 instructor pilot, I am committed to defending this nation anytime and any place, but I need the training and equipment to be ready to perform at my best. This is critical to answering the nation's call to fly, fight, and win. I'd like to thank all of you for the opportunity to be here today and your continued support of your Air Force. I'm now happy to take your questions.
General Spencer, thank you. I thank the members of the panel here. Before I go to Ms. Bordalia, I do want to make a comment. Obviously, yesterday's budget that passed does put money back into the nation's military, much of it in the Overseas Contingency Operation Funds. The good news is that it does allow the HASC to authorize to $613 billion. It allows the appropriators to appropriate to that number. It puts no restrictions on how the OCO dollars are then used to do that. Now, there are internal OMB restrictions that we're going to have to address, I believe, in that particular effort. It is not the best way to run a military to do funding that is base mission through contingency funding. The definition of contingency is something that's unusual or unexpected. Obviously, funding this nation's military is not unusual or unexpected. So it does create, again, a gap next year. I think, though, if used properly, it can be a forcing mechanism to make Congress come to grips with the tough decisions it has to make. And it's not just there in the spending on the military side. It is the most immediate, but the Congress has to address all the different parts of the budget. And if it doesn't address the biggest ticket items, the autopilot spending programs, in an adult way, without thrashing each other here, and I'm talking about members of Congress thrashing each other about what it does or does not do to the individuals involved, instead making sure that it's viable, then we can get this fixed. But our immediate challenge is to make sure that dollars are there for the military today. The budget that passed yesterday, while not the most desirable mechanism, does allow the appropriators and the authorizers to get to the $613 billion number. So it does allow at least some relief, but as with everything else, you want to be able to look in the window past this year, too, to determine the long-term needs. That's where our effort has to come in. So with that, I'll go to Ms. Bordalia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses for their very frank opening statements and how the real challenges that you have to face in the future. I appreciate your being very forward in that. I have two questions, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to ask of each. So if you could kind of put your answers together in a quick way, because we do have quite a few members that I know want to ask questions. I'll start with General Allen. How does OCO funding affect execution of your current baseline funding?
Yes, Congresswoman Bordallo, the OCO funding, while it is better than not receiving the increased funding that's essential to achieve the outcomes that the President's budget set forth, the restrictions that are inherent in OCO funding, as the Chairman highlighted with regard to OMB's current rules, do not allow us to have the flexibility required to get at home station readiness for units that are not deploying in support of contingency operation. It also does not allow multi-year funding, which means we cannot use it for critical modernization programs in acquisition and procurement. And so the restrictions truly create challenges and hard decisions under the current rule set. So as we discussed yesterday with the Senate committee, we would need significantly greater flexibility. What is built into the current President's budget is a $3 to $6 billion OCO to base transfer requirement per year. And so what we're doing is increasing that through funding base requirements through OCO funding. And this is a year-to-year drill, and we need predictable, consistent funding to get at the readiness that we're talking about here today, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, General. Admiral?
Ma'am, very similar to the Army, it's the multi-year constraints that's toughest for the Navy, particularly when you look at shipbuilding and ship contracting. And then in the past, there have been restraints on OCO where it could not be used to buy individual platforms such as aircraft. And so when you look at procurement and you look at our ability to modernize, OCO, the way it's currently set up, is not available for us. And clearly for a capital ship-intensive force, multi-year funding is essential for us to continue to grow the Navy. Thank you.
Thank you. General?
Yeah, thank you, Congresswoman Bordallo. Same thing my two counterparts said. The other issue is to remind is that all the services probably spend well over 50% of their TOA dollar on people. They are our most important resource, our most important weapon. But in order to recruit, retain, PCS move, we spend most of the money on people. The largest chunk for most of the rest of us is in operations and maintenance. So the things that we need, and the reason our readiness is degraded, is because of inability to put sufficient money into modernization, inability to put sufficient money into sustainment. Modernization in the Marine Corps is only 9% of our dollar right now. And the OCO money addresses the O&M and the direct linkages to the current fights we're in. It doesn't give us the help we need to continue to modernize and to buy those big platforms we need. So thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Next.
Again, ma'am, similar story. A couple of things, you know, the Air Force is very capital intensive, so as General Allen mentioned, the ability to plan to buy weapon systems, you know, F-35, bomber, tanker that we're trying to procure, C-130, multi-year contracts, that's multi-year, allows us to have a really good deal funding-wise. Those type of things, it's hard to really plan for if you get 1 year's worth of money. The other thing is that, you know, there are some issues with OCO. For example, one of the OCO rules allows us to buy replacement munitions that we've expended in the war. So we can buy smart munitions that can get pretty expensive that we expended last year. We can't budget for projected weapons that we're going to use. So it puts us behind by a year. So that's something that would concern me. I haven't read the details, but I don't know what the timing of the OCO budget would be. Would it be simultaneous, or would it come later? If it came later, like it does in a lot of cases, again, there are problems inherent with that. What is the total going to be finally? How are we going to know how much we're going to get? What's in there between O&M and procurement? There are rules, for example, you have to execute 80% of your O&M by July. If we get a late OCO, is that going to be a problem? OCO to base has been touched on. That's something we're all worried about. If we wake up one day and OCO is gone, what do we do? You know, in the Air Force's case, we've got several bases in the Middle East that were stood up and are paid for today with OCO funding that we are told will probably endure, will probably stay for the long term. That's fine, but then we'll have to figure out where does that money come from that's now in OCO that we'll have to put into the base. As my colleagues already mentioned, that's now exacerbating this sort of OCO to base transfer at some point. It just further mixes and blurs the lines between the base and an emergency contingency, essentially.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I have one quick question here also, if you could answer. Current defense planning guidance says the United States military should be prepared to do 3 things. 1, win a big war. 2, prevail in a smaller contingency. And 3, protect the homeland, all at the same time. Can your service do that now? And how will the FY16 budget request change all of that? General?
Yes, Congresswoman, I think we've touched on this already, and the fact of the matter is that we are on the lower ragged edge of our capacity to do that with the President's budget. The highlight that I made about our consuming readiness as rapidly as we're generating it means that our ability to respond to the unknown contingencies to reinforce either the major fight or the deterrence fight is significantly strained. And we know what that, it's very easy to say constrained. That sounds clean. It's not clean. It means we're late to the fight in one or both locations with sufficient capacity, and we either fail in our mission or we increase the loss of life to those committed forward from the joint force, as well as innocent civilians that we are charged to protect in accordance with our national security interests.
Thank you. Admiral?
Ma'am, so within those major missions you talked about, the Navy has some very specific responsibilities. One is strategic deterrence, and no matter what happens, we will maintain zero risk in strategic deterrence. But when you talk about projecting power despite anti-access aerial denial circumstances, and then this deterring and defeating an aggressor, winning the war, with the PB16 budget, those are still at risk. But if you talk BCA, then we will not be able to project power, and we would not be able to deter and defeat aggression.
Thank you. General?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Your Marine Corps, of course, we consider ourselves to be the 911 force, the crisis response force, and that is our focus. So as I said in the opening statement, we guarantee that we will have ready forces for the Fight Tonight mission. But to your question, ma'am, the contingency mission or the deliberate operations plan, that's when we have to go to our home station units who are already at lower than 50% readiness and are degraded. So the answer then would be yes, but. They're coming, yes, they'll be there, but they'll be later, but they'll not have the right leaders in the right positions, but they won't be fully trained. So we are going to accept risk in our ability to respond and to win in a contingency and in a war.
Thank you. General?
Yes, ma'am. To answer your question directly, could we meet the defense strategic guidance at the President's budget level? Yes, just barely. Could we execute the defense strategic guidance under sequestration? No. One of the ways we describe the Air Force sometimes, and I think all my colleagues could probably describe their service as similar, it's almost like a light switch. I mean, you cut on a light switch, and if we go into a contingency, we expect air superiority to just happen. We expect if someone launches a weapon, a GPS will just guide it to where it needs to go. You know, we expect our nuclear deterrent to work so we don't get a nuclear attack. I mean, we expect those things to happen. That's what the American people expects of us, and that's what we want to provide. I get concerned on sequestration, and we're going to cut that light switch on, and some things are not going to work.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bordallo. We'll now go to Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess most of my questions will be for you, General Spencer. I want to talk a little bit about the civilian workforce, but I would ask a favor of you, all of you, in that maybe you go back and review some of the testimony from a few years ago when the reductions in your force were being referred to as right-sizing by your own leadership, and it was the Armed Services Committee that was trying to stop those reductions in force size, and quite honestly, the leadership at the Pentagon was supporting the President's position in reducing them. I would just ask that you go back and read the testimony of your leaders from just a few years ago when they felt like those cuts were acceptable, and we were trying to stop some of them. But I represent Robins Air Force Base, tremendous civilian workforce, crucial role in generating readiness for our Air Force. And one of my concerns is that there continue to be proposals to cut the civilian defense workforce. They go well beyond any of the department proposals. Existing law already mandates cuts in the civilian workforce similar to those of uniformed personnel. And my concern is in two forms. It would have a direct impact on the ability to deliver weapon systems on time and on budget for our depots, or from our depots, I should say. And secondly, if you arbitrarily reduce the civilian workforce, would that not add stress to the uniformed personnel, and soldiers and airmen would be forced to spend less time training for the missions and more time performing non-mission related tasks? So, General Spencer, could you speak to the arbitrary cuts to the civilian workforce and what impact they have on Air Force readiness?
Congressman, first of all, I mean, we're in violent agreement. I agree with everything you said. As you know, I was stationed at Robins. I've been stationed at all the Air Force depots. I love it at Robins. It's a great community, great workforce, great work ethic. If you could clarify me the arbitrary reductions you're talking about, and then we have had some headquarters reductions, 20% headquarters reduction that was mandated by the SecDef. Which I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, General. These are legislative proposals from other members of Congress.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, that would not work for us. It would not work. I'm not sure if everyone has the sort of right perspective on civilian employees. First of all, 96% of our civilian employees don't work in the National Capital Region. They're out in the field, getting our mission done, turning wrenches, launching airplanes, launching satellites. These are critical to the mission of the Air Force, no doubt about it. And so we cannot afford to impact our civilian workforce with an arbitrary cut, period, dot.
They're extremely skilled, and when we break faith with them, we run the risk of losing some of the most talented people with regard to rebuilding our airplanes and the weapon systems that our warfighters need. And I'm extremely concerned about the lack of knowledge with regard to their value to national security with some of our members. Not with you or with the people at the Department of Defense, but with some of my colleagues. And just one other thing with regard to that, the trends in the cost of weapons and the system sustainment, the increases there. Can you give any assessment on what the drivers of that and what we could do to help reverse that trend?
Yes, Congressman. One of the primary drivers of weapon system sustainment cost increase is the aging of our systems. So as our systems get older, the parts break faster, a lot of the manufacturers go out of business, we have to manufacture the parts. It just becomes an expensive proposition to maintain old weapon systems. So we could certainly use your help not only to sustain the weapon systems costs that we have now, but to help us with our modernization so we can get new systems into our inventory.
Well, thank you for that. And one of the things that you mentioned that I caught on was when manufacturers go out of business, and that is where I think it is extremely important for national security for us to maintain organic capabilities. And while we can, through 50/50 and other things, share that workload with the private sector from a national security standpoint, we have to have the ability as a country to deliver those weapon systems to the men and women in the fight. I again, I want to thank all of you for being here, and just hope again that you'll take time to go back and look at the testimony from just a couple of years ago, where members of the Armed Services Committee were trying to stop the reductions, and it's hard for us to keep you fully funded if the leadership at the DOD isn't standing with us.
Congressman Scott, if I may, sir, and this is the third year I've had the honor and the privilege to testify before the subcommittee, and we will certainly take your guidance there and go back and review testimony. But I'd just like to be clear for the record that when the leadership comes over to testify, we talk about the POM as submitted, and we talk about the ability to execute the defense guidance with the POM as submitted. When we get the marks, and then particularly when we're very clear for 3 or 4 years in a row about the devastating effects of the Budget Control Act, we are now 4 years into POMs that have been adjusted and 2 years after a BCA. I think we're all pretty clear that we are at the lower ragged edge, and we are in hopes that through the good offices of this committee and subcommittee back to the larger House, we can send the message that this is devastating to the ability of the Department of Defense to safeguard the nation.
General, I didn't support those cuts, and I was concerned when I first heard about the reductions in personnel that it was taking us away from a primary goal of 1 to 3 dwell time for active duty and 1 to 5 for Guard and Reserve. So with that, I'm past my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For General Allen, would like to get your thoughts on recent decision made to keep us at near 10,000 in Afghanistan through the rest of this year first, and then along the same line would like you to discuss the Army's preparations for potentially having to use ground forces in Iraq and Syria. I know nobody wants to do that, and it's not part of the President's request for this authorization for use of military force, but I think it's within reason to assume that if we want to achieve the President's stated goals with the current forces that are on the ground, we have to seriously consider this. I'm assuming you have planned for that. And what I want to know is, within this budget, do we have the resources to meet our commitments in Afghanistan and Iraq, in addition to every other potential threat that has been outlined earlier?
Thank you, Congressman O'Rourke. I appreciate both of your questions. And to Afghanistan first, I believe this is a very good outcome for accomplishing the mission that was established in what we were set forth to do with our Resolute Support mission. I was fortunate to be in Afghanistan in early February, and I was able to get out and meet with all of our leaders, and particularly with our 2 divisions that are deployed over there, providing both essential mission command and advise and assist support to our Afghan security forces, from the 1st Cavalry Division in Texas and from the 3rd Infantry Division in Georgia. And both of these missions were being accomplished with great leadership, with great focus, with great precision, but with significant risk as we were drawing down the forces while still trying to maintain touch with the capabilities within the Afghan security forces that needed to be finished. So,
I don't want to interrupt you, but I've got limited time.
Okay.
The 2 scenarios I just described are new over the course of this year. We weren't necessarily anticipating them a year ago. How has that changed how we're prepared to fund those in this budget?
Well, we do appreciate the increase in OCO because the increased numbers in Afghanistan are greater than what was programmed. We did, however, program to train the forces to backfill the forces that are there now and to continue that in case it was required. So we will be trained and ready to continue this mission. And I believe the OCO funding increase will enable us to meet that, to include the increase in ISR that is above what was originally programmed for this year. And we will meet that. In terms of our ability to meet the response that may be required in Iraq, just as we were capable of deploying the 3rd Brigade Combat Team of the 82nd Airborne Division in response to the initial advise and assist increase, we will have forces prepared when called. Now, clearly,
And those forces are funded within this budget.
yeah, the President's budget fully funds our combat training center rotations where we prepare all of our units for full spectrum mission readiness. Sequestration will put that at risk because units will not arrive at the combat training centers as ready as they should be, and that will potentially put us at risk. So the President's budget does enable us to do that.
If I'm reading this correctly, the Army's total O&M, which funds our readiness, is down a little from last year. Is that reflecting the reduction in force size, and will that continue to track if we stay under current caps to 2020 when the total force size is down to 420,000?
Well, first of all of our current end strength above 490,000 is funded in OCO, so it is not a reflection for this year of the drawdown in our force. It is really a reflection of we got $5 billion less this year, and we had to take some cuts. And as General Spencer highlighted, we really only have two places to draw it from. We're going to pay for our people because that's a sacred trust, and we're going to meet that requirement. So it either comes out of O&M or modernization, and we've had to make very hard choices in both of that. We've reduced our modernization 25%, even in the President's budget submission. And so we're facing a very tough balancing act, and the reflection of the reduced O&M reflects those hard choices.
In conclusion, couldn't agree more with General Paxton that our people are going to be our greatest resource and our greatest weapon. And with your conclusion that unless we do some difficult things, make some tough decisions like a BRAC, like rethinking compensation, pension, and health, you mentioned restructuring aviation, then we're going to have to cut people. And for me, that is not acceptable. So I appreciate your testimony today. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate, once again, other comments that were made in regards to your candor. I'm obviously concerned about how we move forward. We have been struggling as a Congress to figure out what do we do about sequestration, and that's not your problem. That's our problem. But I am concerned, though, as we move forward. I think we've learned some things about our withdrawal from Iraq that put us in the position that we are today, with trying to figure out now what do we do with the downfall, what's going on within Iraq. And so, I was happy to see the President didn't draw down more troops in Afghanistan. I worry about what he wants to do next year, obviously, at the end of 16, to draw out all of our forces. I think that we put ourselves in the same predicament that we are today in Iraq, where we're not quite ready. And I think that President Ghani made that pretty clear. While he wants to do as much as he can, that country obviously it's in a tough spot because of their ability to raise money, to get employment within their own country. So I worry that if we were to actually follow what the President wants to do and withdraw our forces at the end of 16, that we would be in a comparable situation that we find ourselves in today in Iraq, figuring out what do we do. And I agree with Mr. O'Rourke that I don't want my sons going back to Iraq and Afghanistan in the fight, but I also believe that without American leading from the front, that we will not get to the end state that we want to see ourselves in and for those countries in question. So my question is obviously on readiness. And General Allen, I worry that when we hear the Army is at 33% readiness, that should cause a lot of pause amongst all of our colleagues within the House of Representatives. And, our constitutional requirement is to defend this nation. Number one is the number one constitutional requirement. We kind of forgot that in a myriad of all the other requests and wants and nice to have things that, you know, are good to have, but we forgot that we need to actually worry about you all in regards to providing for the common defense. I do worry when we start talking about balancing a budget on the backs of the men and women that are out there that have volunteered to serve this country. And I get really upset and worried that the Pentagon is, and I understand where you're coming from, but the Pentagon is willing to sacrifice some of that, you know, to meet the mission, while instead of saying, you know what, we need to start talking about keeping compensation. Now, for future compensation, that's not an issue. I think that you can talk about that. But I worry that, you know, we want to balance a budget on the backs of these men and women that have given everything and are willing to give everything in the defense of this country. So, General Allen, how do we keep the people that we're talking about that we don't want to lose, those great NCOs and officers that are at risk? How do we actually keep them in service of their country if we start cutting compensation?
Well, thank you, Congressman Nugent. I will say first and foremost, our great soldiers and leaders are meeting the demands that are placed before them and are volunteering to stay. Our retention rate remains very, very high, over 113% last year of the goal.
Great.
So our leaders want to serve on this great
I know
Army.
they do. I know they do, but
And I believe that the most important thing that we must do is sustain their trust. And their trust is sustained through predictable funding that is consistently delivered and enables us to have them trained and ready for the missions that are required of them. That is the first and foremost responsibility that we have, because, as you said, defending our nation is job one. And they are committed to that, and we must be committed to them. I will highlight that the cost of a soldier has doubled since 2001. Okay, so it is important to keep that in mind, and you know, we believe that some of the compensation reform that we are proposing is reasonable without putting the balancing the budget on the back of the soldier. We would never put forth something that puts the burden on the soldier who has volunteered to serve his country.
well, I just know that, you know, from a family perspective, when, you know, typically it's the wife who does the budget, who does the checks, make sure everything gets paid, and when they see a reduction in their BAH, that creates a stress, and I know we haven't actually had to deal with that yet, but that will create a stress on the force that may not be apparent today, but you know, when you got the wife back home nipping at your heels because she's the one that's doing the budget and writing the checks, that's a big issue, and I think that's one of those things that compounds in the future, and it's not in your face today. And so I worry from that standpoint. We need, and you talk about it, families are so important in keeping our soldiers and airmen and Marines out and sailors out there in the fight. So I appreciate all your comments. Anything else that anybody would like to ask? I'm out of time.
Thanks, Congressman. We're keenly aware that your soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines represent somewhere between 1/2 and 1% of the American population. I mean, 1/2 of 1%.
Right.
So our goal is to make sure, as General Allen said, when they go into a fight, we never want them to go into a fair fight. They ought to have all the tools at their behest to win. And we want them to have confidence. We want to have confidence in their gear, confidence in their training, and confidence in their leadership. So every time we submit the budget, every time we articulate the budget, every time we defend the budget, it is with that in mind, to take care of that 1/2 of 1%, to accomplish the difficult missions our nation gives us, and to ensure that every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine has that confidence in their, and as you said a minute ago, we may enlist a soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine, but we're going to re-enlist a family.
All right.
And Congressman, I certainly appreciate your comments. I'm prior enlisted. I spent 7 years enlisted, and back then, I know what it was like to live from paycheck to paycheck. And my wife was nipping at my heels. In fact, she still does. But that's a different.
I've been married 40 years. I understand.
That's for a different hearing. But But what we wrestle with, I think, is balance. And so clearly we need to provide, I think General Allen used the term, reasonable amount of compensation, but we all owe our men and women in uniform the equipment and the training they need if we have to send them to harm's way. And so as budgets draw down, particularly if you get into a sequestration environment, yes, you have to focus on compensation, but we have to send our folks forward in harm's way with the right equipment and the right training. And so that's what we're wrestling with, finding out what the reasonable amount of compensation is in the context of balancing the other things that they need.
I would like to add, their compensation for what we ask them to do is extremely important. But there are immediate impacts to the quality of their service when we sequester. I was the Deputy Fleet Forces Commander when we sequestered in 2013. It is a bad day for a commander when you have to go down to the waterfront, go on a cruiser, and tell those folks they're not deploying, they're not getting underway. The commanding officer, the chiefs, the sailors, that's how they qualify. That's their core profession, and they're going to be tied up next to a pier. We will lose people because they will not have satisfaction, because they will not be able to do their jobs, as well as if we have to impact compensation.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the indulgence. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Nugent. We'll go down to Mr. Gibson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the panelists here today. Thank you for your service, achievements, and sacrifices, and for the sacrifices of your families. Mr. Chairman, as you know, put significant emphasis on restoring deterrence, principles of peace through strength by reasserting the ability of the global response force. Acknowledge the comments here this morning with regard to sequester and the need for steady and consistent funding. And that's really a point for my colleagues here. We have to work together on that and have the temperament to solve these problems. We had an opportunity in 2012 with a bipartisan budget that was inspired by Simpson-Bowles. It only got 38 votes. Whatever it is, if we're going to do something big like that, or if we're going to do something like Ryan Murray, now is the time. We've got to start assembling the coalition to get that done. That being said, Mr. Chairman, what I think our committee should do is document the risk as it relates to the global response force. So I have a specific question here today, recognizing we're in unclassified settings, so you may not be able to specifically respond to it. You can maybe generally respond to it, but for the record, if you could specifically respond to it, and the staff will assemble. And it has to do with the war plans now with regard to the global response force, your specific requirements, and where you stand today in terms of readiness to meet those requirements. And you use two categories, please, the President's budget and sequester. So we can document that here in the committee, and that will allow us, as myself, I'll own this, and then perhaps the committee, that we communicate with our colleagues that we can address this. So I'd like to begin actually with the Air Force and then work our way on the panel.
Yes, Congressman, again, to answer your question directly, with the President's budget, we could respond just barely. With unsequestration, we could not. Probably any deeper than that, getting into war plans, I'd like to come back and brief you in a classified session if we could.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. And I can, in the unclass setting, give you two fairly good illustrative examples. And the subject for us is amphibious ships. And we work very closely with my counterpart, VCNO, and with the Navy. We have probably one of the best working relationships we've had in years. But we have a problem with amphibious ships, and we have a problem with inventory, and we have a problem with availability. And there are two different metrics for doing this. One is the steady state, when all the combatant commands would like to have sailors and Marines forward deployed around the world to be there when it most matters and to respond at a crisis tonight. The CNO and the Commandant are on record as saying we need somewhere north of 50 ships to be able to answer all the current crisis and contingency combatant command requirements. To your specific question about war plans and contingency response, we know that under the two most stressing war plans, we would need 38 amphibious ships. That's a matter of record. That's a matter before Congress. We have agreed under a budget-constrained environment the better part of 2 decades ago that we would do it with 33. But that 33 was predicated on having 33 available, having the money for the 33, or being willing to put them in the yard for required maintenance with the expectation that 90% of them will be operational available and be able to get underway within the timelines to meet the war plans. Right now, we don't have 33 ships. We don't even have 30 on the waterfront. We're not going to get to 33 for another year, and we're not going to get the right 33 until 2024, until the end of the decade. So we have an inventory problem. And then because of furlough and sequestration in the shipyards, we have an availability problem where we can't get them out and get them underway. So the Navy Marine team in general and the Marine Corps in specific, we think amphibious ships are very, very challenged under the current budget, let alone sequestration. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. As we consumed readiness, and as I've mentioned later, we are in the process of resetting, doing the maintenance on a lot of these ships. Today, we keep deployed 2 carrier strike groups. So that's a carrier with a cruiser and associated destroyers. And we have enough readiness to have 1 that we can surge. And then for an amphibious readiness group, which is normally a large amphib with 2 smallers, an LSD and LPD, we are keeping 2 deployed with a 3rd that we can surge. This is the lowest we've been probably since I've been in the Navy, and we, as General Paxton pointed out, we are on a path with this budget to reset and get us back to having 2 carriers deployed and 3 in surge capacity, and having 2 ARGs deployed with 3 in a standby capacity. For the carrier strike groups, that's about fiscal year 18, and then for the amphibious ready groups, that's about fiscal year 20. But that presumes we have a budget, we have multi-year, we can continue to buy the ships we're buying, and that we can continue to do the money to do the maintenance, and then the money to do the training for our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Gibson, and it is appropriate for you to ask this question from a joint force perspective, because as you know, and thank God, I have never deployed to war with anything less than a joint force. And our Army contingent of the Global Response Force is a relatively small component that is capable of forced entry, early entry operations, but absolutely dependent upon the readiness of follow-on forces to accomplish the missions that are likely to be required of it. And that depends upon all of us having the forces ready. As you know from your time in the 82nd Airborne Division, we don't get anywhere without the Air Force, all right? They put the air in airborne and the capacity to get the global reach. And we depend upon the forces of the Marine Corps and the Navy to enable us to have the joint capabilities that are required. So we require that. It is at risk for sure with sequestration, and we have prioritized the Army contingent, but we have done so by going to tiered readiness and sequestration. So we will have a global response force capability, but the follow-on forces will have insufficient training and insufficient readiness to reinforce if required.
Thank you. Thank the panelists for their responses. Mr. Chairman, as I yield back, I reiterate, I think we should take this on. We generally have one slide that shows top-line numbers, and I think that's been effective in talking to our colleagues. But I think if we had a finer point, if we had fidelity as it relates to this, and even if it has to go at the classified level, I think it would be something that very resonates among our colleagues. Pat, I'd ask you to take this on, McGee, and with the staff, that we could pull this together because we're going to get this for the record. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. I couldn't agree with you more. What we've tried to do is to make sure that these types of bundles of information are available to everyone, but specifically non-HASC members to be able to sit down in a secure setting, because you have to be able to talk about these things at the top secret level. So we will work with the staff to make sure that those are available. We've done those in the past, and Mr. Gibson, we'll work with you and the vice chiefs and the chiefs and make sure we have that information available, and we will schedule another round of briefings for members to come in so they can get the details on this. At this point, I ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's hearing after all subcommittee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Is there objections? Without objection, non-subcommittee members will be recognized at the appropriate time for 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me join the committee this morning. I guess the big concern that I see, and General Allen, you pointed it out in your testimony about, in terms of brigades, 36 brigades will be reduced to individual and crew level training. The last time that we saw any combination of effort among our services in, with formations of vehicles, paratroopers, airstrikes, combination with all of the service forces in the harder things that we do was in 2003. The company commanders at that time with 4 to 6 years service would now be battalion commanders. The battalion commanders at the time, if they're still around, would be major generals. And so we've seen a migration of leadership at both the NCO level and the officer level, where even knowing how to do these things is being lost, our core capabilities. And then we see a foreign policy shift with statements from the White House talking about a shift to the Pacific with all of the difficulties that jungle warfare and long logistic lines would create for our armed services. I have to say, I can't think of a time in our history, except maybe 1940, where we stand at greater risk. And at that time, we saw 160,000 Americans surrender because we couldn't get to them in the Philippines. It wasn't for lack of fighting spirit. It wasn't for lack of training. It was just for lack of resources to be able to get to them. And so with that, we all know that we can fight with whatever insufficient implements we have if we have good, strong leaders. As I look at the training base and see some of that, the focus now is being reduced, as you had mentioned, General Allen, it reduced to individual and crew level with our combat brigades. I'm sure this can be extended to fleets, airframes, all kinds of things. How do we survive that?
Thanks, Congressman Russell. And as you know, the Chief of Staff of the Army's top priority for our Army for the last 2 years has been developing the leaders that will thrive in the uncertain and ambiguous world that we live in today. That commitment has remained, and concurrent with our demand to restore our full spectrum capability, the kind of force you talked about that fought the March to Baghdad, that fought so effectively in Iraq and Afghanistan, is underway at our combat training centers. So our combat training centers deliver both the leaders required for the future with the skills required to dominate in this uncertain world that we live in, and the agility to respond to the unexpected and to thrive under adversity. That is happening each and every day, each and every rotation at our combat training centers. We will do 14 decisive action rotations at the National Training Center. 14 brigade combat teams will receive that training this year, building to 17 over the course of the next 3 years. And so we are getting after that, but it depends upon predictable funding, and it really depends upon enabling us to increase the funding for our home station training so we arrive at those training centers ready to fully take advantage of the complexity of the training environment we deliver and the challenges that occur there. And frankly, as some of our members have seen, our leaders respond with amazing results, and you can be very, very proud of how committed they are to being ready for the next conflict.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. In terms of the rebalance to the Pacific, there may be a different perspective for those of us in the maritime domain. When you look at the countries that live in the Pacific or the Pacific Rim, they are investing in their militaries and they are investing in their navies. This is a different perspective than the countries of the Western nations, which some of them are struggling to meet 2% of their GDP despite commitments. And in addition, I think sometimes we forget the Pacific not only holds countries with significant capability like China, but Russia is in the Pacific. And our relationship with Russia clearly is changing. In addition, there are many countries that either have nuclear weapons or are attempting to get nuclear weapons, and they too are in the Pacific. So for our perspective, when you look at who's investing in their navies, where there are potential fault lines of conflict, there is a potential it could be in the maritime domain, and it is our responsibility to be ready for that. That said, with this budget, even with the president budget, we've had to slow down a modernization for both ballistic missile defense and then to be able to fight in an anti-access aerial denial. And so then under sequestration, we would probably lose all of our modernization. And it has generally been our technological edge as a Navy that's allowed us to maintain maritime superiority. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Russell. Nice to see you again. Appreciate
see
the
you,
time.
General.
A little bit from both what General Allen just offered and what Admiral Howard just offered. We, as a ground-centric force, if you will, in the Marine Corps, and as a Marine Air Ground Task Force, we have aviation assets, so not to be confused. But when we look at a projected ground campaign, we need to have leaders who are ready at home station. So we suffer from the same sacrifices we've had to make through budgetary constraints at home station ranges and training areas. So we have qualified leaders, we have qualified training, and we're going to guarantee, and this testimony was before you came today, but we will guarantee that the crisis response force, the Fight Tonight force, is ready to go. The issue is who is back at home station, and have we crimped our modernization and our sustainment costs where we are unable to train them at home station. The second piece, back to both what Admiral Howard said about the Asia-Pacific region and to an earlier comment from General Allen, it is a joint force. We depend on the capabilities of other services. If we can't train with ISR and get the feeds that we need, the intel feeds, which come from a lot of them from other services, then our training is reduced. For our aviation arm, and we can have all the best pilots in the world, and we can work hard to get our aircraft through the maintenance pipeline. But if the ships aren't out there, then we don't get deck bounces and we don't get night vision qualifications. And consequently, the unit that goes will get them, and the unit at home station will go into the fight having untrained pilots. So we're at risk for that, sir.
And thank you also for your question, Congressman. I think the example you used in with the Philippines is a good one because not much keeps me up at night, but the fact, I mean, the Air Force was born and it has its foundation in innovation and technology. And I'm really concerning that the gap, and we've enjoyed a technological edge. I'm really concerned that that's closing, and it's closing pretty fast. And you know, we've always been in a position where our potential adversaries would wake up and say, where in the world did they get that technology from? How did they do that? I'm afraid we're going to wake up and say, where in the world did they get that from? And then what are we going to do about it? That bothers me. And I just see that walking away from us, and I'm concerned. I don't see a hue and cry as to what we need to stop this. And so I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we need the resources. This is not about just getting more money. I mean, I think the American people, I mean, this is not a Super Bowl game where if you lose, you come back and play next year. The expectation of us is we go in and we win every time, and we win decisively. And I get worried about that as we continue to draw down the DoD budget. Are we going to be able to deliver that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. We'll now go to Ms. Bordallo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have just a simple question and maybe a statement. General Allen, I was well pleased to hear that recruitment is up to par, and you were the one that commented on that, were you not? The recruitment?
Ma'am, I actually commented on retention.
Retention, yes.
But recruitment this year is okay as well. But in the future year, it's at risk.
Let me say, I'm looking to the future. And if we continue to draw down on funding, certainly we're putting our young men and women at risk. How anxious will they be to join the military, and how will their families feel about this? So I think this is another situation that we've got to look at. I mean, certainly if, and this is widely known, sequestration continues. We have to continue to draw down on funding. They know that our military may weaken them. You're putting their young men and women in harm's way when they're out there, trying to win a war. So I think that the recruitment numbers will be probably going down as well. That's just a statement, and I was just thinking about it. But I do have a question for you, General Allen. What is the status of the Army Sustainable Readiness Model? What assumptions are being made in the development of the model, and how is the National Guard being incorporated into the model?
Well, thank you, ma'am. First of all, let me hit the recruiting, because it is important to highlight the fact that of our 17 to 24-year-old young Americans, about 360,000 of them across all of America meet the prerequisites to become a member of the armed forces, okay? That's the starting point. But they're also the same population that the colleges are attracting and that businesses are attracting. And so we are all competing for that, we like to refer to as the top 1% or less of America. The Army requires 120,000 of that 360,000 just to sustain our current force level. Okay, so we are absolutely laser focused on the challenges of recruiting going forward. We're putting additional resources at it in terms of people and money. But at the end of the day, we believe that our young Americans still want to serve on this championship armed forces team that we field. And sustaining trust with our people is absolutely essential in accomplishing that. To the sustainable readiness model question, it is a total force model. Everything that we do is about the total force. We fight as a total force. We train as a total force. We recruit as a total force. We retain as a total force. And so it is absolutely a component of our effort. And specifically, what we are working with the National Guard Bureau on is how can we better sustain the readiness that we generate when we send our 2 National Guard brigades to our annual combat training center rotations. Because what the active force is able to do is within weeks of returning from a combat training center rotation, they're back in the field fixing the shortfalls that were identified to get at that peak level of readiness. For the Guard, as you know, they don't have that ability to do so. So we are working with them on how do we sustain that readiness longer, which ultimately is what we owe the American people. Once we train and develop readiness, we want to sustain it as long as we can so that we have increased surge capacity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just one quick question, Mr. Chairman, to General Spencer. The Air Force today is responding to greater operational demands from with the 35% fewer forces and aging aircraft. If smaller and more ready are mutually exclusive, what are the consequences? If smaller and more ready are mutually exclusive, what are the consequences of this? And in particular, how does the shortage of maintenance affect the Air Force's ability to generate requested forces?
Yes, ma'am. Well, first, you have to, I would ask myself, ready for what? So if we are right now as small as we can get to support what the country has asked us to do. We really, in terms of our overall ceiling for manpower and our equipment, we are at the bottom right now. We can't go any lower, or we'll have to rewrite the strategy and do something different. So getting smaller than we are now and quote unquote more ready, again, is going to capacity has a capability in all of it in and of itself. So you have to have enough stuff to move around. You can't get so small and say, well, I'm smaller, but I'm more ready. I'm ready to go do what? If if you have a wide variety of demands and you don't have enough to go around, that formula won't work. In terms of maintenance, we are short. One of the reasons we drew a red line this year on drawing down the force was a lot of our maintenance folks, we've drawn them down too far, and so we aren't able to generate the sorties that we need at our bases to make sure our pilots are trained and make sure our airplanes are ready to go. So we've not only drawn down, but we're starting to reallocate, if you will, the folks that we have more out into our flight line maintenance areas.
Thank you very much, General. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back, but I do have a few more questions that I'd like to enter into the record.
Sure. Yes. We'll make sure those questions get entered in the record and get the the service branches to provide answers for you. I'd like to thank the members of the panel for joining us today. I do have a couple of questions as we end and want to get your direction. As you know, readiness includes not just training and equipping, but also the modernization element. And you all talked in brief about that. But I think it's one of the more important things that we have to speak about. And you all alluded to the fact that our adversaries are pursuing technology upgrades at light speed. And when we mark time and they're traveling at light speed, even though we have an advantage, when we're static and they're traveling at light speed, it doesn't take long for them to catch up. And I think by any measure, we're looking at, in a fairly short window, to be looking at their tailpipe when it comes to technology and maintaining that overwhelming superiority that General Paxton spoke about. And I think that's an obligation this nation has to every man and woman that serves in the military, and that is to make sure that when they sign up, when we attract the best and brightest, that we also tell them we're going to be committed to making sure that you are properly compensated, but also that you have the tools necessary to be successful in the job that you do. And that is, we're going to give you overwhelming superiority. So when we ask you to go into harm's way, you're going to have the highest probability of fighting to victory and coming home safe. I mean, we all know it's a dangerous business, but we owe it to our men and women to do that. If we don't commit to modernizing our forces, or we are stagnant in keeping up, then we do our men and women in the military a disservice. And we can do great things on the compensation side to make sure the compensation and benefits stay where it is. But as you said, the young men and women that come to the military come there for a variety of different purposes. Obviously, we need to properly compensate them and to provide them benefits, but they come there for the challenge, and they come there knowing that they are there to serve their country, and they want to defend this nation when we ask them to go into harm's way. But they also want to go there knowing that they have the best of what's available to do that. And doing anything less than that, I think, is an abdication of our responsibility as members of Congress under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and we have to make sure that that happens. With that being said, we also have an obligation under this new budget scenario with a lot of what's happening being pursued under OCO to make sure that we are directive in the budget language. As we know, the way things have existed up to this point is OCO has been used, again, for a fairly specific and limited sets of operational aspects of the military. This budget opens it up and says we're going to allow the authorizers and the appropriators to appropriate and authorize to $613 billion. But there are still the internal OMB controls on what OCO is. And if the House Armed Services Committee and the House Appropriations Committee, Subcommittee on Defense, are not directive in the language to say, this is what you will do with those OCO dollars, then the default position is for OMB to say, here are the limits, and this is what you can and cannot spend it on. So I think it's incumbent upon us, and I say us, both appropriators and authorizers, to get that right. The branches have told us where the needs are from the standpoint of training and equipping. But one of those areas that I think has to be emphasized in this and becomes a forcing mechanism for Congress next year to make sure we continue with this effort to modernize is to get your direction on the most pressing needs on modernization. And I would like for all of you to just give us your overview about where you believe your most pressing needs are in modernization so that we have some perspective as authorization and appropriations take place to understand what do we need to do, not just on the training side and the equipping side, and you all have given us a good perspective on that about where we need to go with our national training centers, where we need to go with getting our pilots sea time to make sure that our sailors are at sea, to make sure our Marines are also there with the ARCMUs, understanding how they are trained up, ready to go. But the place I think we haven't given the attention that needs to be given is on the side of modernization. So General Allen, I'll give you the opportunity to start, and we'll move to each of the other members from there.
Thanks, Chairman Whitman. First of all, I appreciate the highlight of the tough balancing act and the hard choices that we've had to make, even with the President's budget submission. And that President's budget submission reflects a 25% cut to our modernization program because of the hard choices that we've had to make to sustain readiness, even to deliver 33% of our brigade combat teams ready to deploy globally as they are today. There are, basically a snowplow effect has gone into our modernization program across every program. Now, we are underway with a critical effort in divestiture to ensure that every resource dollar that we put into our modernization program delivers the best effect to offer the best possible equipment to our deploying soldiers, which, as you highlight, is what we owe to our soldiers. No adversary deserves a fair fight, and if we fail to increase our modernization efforts, as has been highlighted by each of my teammates, that gap is closing, and we cannot allow that to happen. So for the Army, there's at least a dozen priority programs that require more funding, but I'll highlight just a couple. I highlighted in my opening statement that our aviation restructure initiative was a budget-driven effort to increase readiness, increase modernization, and increase the capacity and capability of our aviation across the total force. It accelerates the UH-60 Mike modernization for our National Guard by 3 to 5 years, which is really, really important for defense of the homeland. It is the most critical capability that our governors need in response to crises in the homeland. We have to modernize for cyber. As we have talked about previously, we are vulnerable to cyber attack, and right now we are on a path for a multi-year plan to address those vulnerabilities. We ought not be forced to take a multi-year approach. We ought be modernizing our network as rapidly as we possibly can, recognizing that there are always going to be budget constraints. Under sequestration, our network modernization would take a $400 million cut. And so a multi-year plan would become, exceeding beyond the palm. And that is absolutely unacceptable. The other area that we require really a more accelerated approach is ensuring the installation readiness, which is a critical component of our training and readiness, as we have previously talked, and specifically protecting against insider threat attacks. Right now, because of budget constraints, we have put soldiers at many missions, which means they're not training and preparing for their core combat mission. We need increased funding to enable us to address the insider threat, to ensure that our installations are ready, and ensure our soldiers are in the units training to deploy to war.
Thank you, General. Admiral Howard.
So when we talk about modernization, you can see from our fiscal year 15 budget submission to the fiscal year 16 where we took risk. And we took some risks by slowing down or deferring modernization, specifically at that future fight in anti-access aerial denial. Specifically, we took risk in munitions. We took risk in electronic warfare, particularly associated with our surface ships, and we took risk in ballistic missile defense. And then in another area where we could actually use some assistance, we appreciate the work we've done with Congress on the cruiser modification. And if we could relook at that SMOSA fund and then lift restrictions, that would also help us get to a better modernization package. Thank you.
Thanks, Admiral Howard. General Paxton.
Thank you, Chairman. So we had discussed several times before, all of the services, when we talk about fiscal predictability in that top line, all of the services make very deliberate, very conscious, very thoughtful decisions about the way we're going to modernize. And when the budget gets sequestered, those decisions are imperiled. So for the Marine Corps right now, we are in the midst of an aviation bathtub. We made a decision several years ago that at least 3 of our fixed-wing platforms were age limits, had high maintenance costs, and indeed were not comparable to the cutting-edge technology and the unfair fight that we want to have. So we bought into the V-22 on the rotary wing, and more importantly today to the F-35 JSF on the fixed wing. We're in the bathtub where we are having to retire old aircraft, or because of other issues on sequestration, they're not ready basic aircraft. It takes too much to maintain them to get them off the line. An example with our V-22 was almost as soon as that rotary wing aircraft went IOC, it had to go FOC, and we put it in the fight in Iraq. Now, we're delighted we did it because it proved the technology. Twice the lift, twice the payload, twice the range. We're convinced that the F-35 at IOC will be better than the AV-8 or the F-18 at FOC, or as is today. But we're in the middle of that bathtub. Sequestration puts constraints on us for the number of aircraft we can buy. It's a joint service program. It's an international program. It imperils the issues of cost benefits and the quantity and the value of quantity. So that's point number 1, sir, on modernization. On point number 2 is you can become a hollow force, as you well know, so you can become a hollow force in many ways. You can become a hollow force because of insufficient people. You can be a hollow force because of aged equipment. So we need to strike a balance, all of the services, between our people, our equipment, and our modernization. The one thing we don't want to have is, in the Marine Corps, for example, is we don't want to have now with the V-22 and the F-35, we don't want to have a 21st century aviation capability. And then we don't have our ACVs and our ship-to-shore. We can't work with the Army on the JLTV, and we have a 20th century ground capability. And then because we've done all of those, the maintainers are not there, and we have a 19th century logistics capability. We have to modernize all of them together. Sure. And the predictability of the budget's essential for that, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, General Paxton. General Spencer?
Mr. Chairman, I'll start off answering your question with a statement. We have 12 fleets of aircraft in the Air Force that qualify for an antique license plate in the state of Virginia. That's a fact.
Yeah.
So for us specifically, as you know, we're trying to fill the F-35. Mm-hmm. That's crucial to many of us here on the table. And so some folks will say, well, why? Well, majority of our fleet are 4th generation, and our adversaries are rolling out what they would call, or some would call, a 4.5 generation. Yeah. Now, training, you know, we have the best trained pilots in the world. But if you put them in an airplane that has less capabilities than another, I mean, that's a real issue. So we've got to get to that 5th generation fighter. We then need our long-range strike bomber, which will help us penetrate into anti-access, anti-denial areas around the globe. And then our third priority is a tanker. You know, I was going to say our tanker is old as General Paxson, but it's not quite that old. But they are on average about 52 years old. We've got to get those tankers in and rolling. As you know, we don't go very far without tankers to get folks across the globe. So those are our top 3. Not to mention, I mean, JSTARS, AWACS, our ICBM fleet's going to have to be upgraded. I mean, I could go on and on. Space, I could go on and on, but those are our top 3.
Very good. Thanks, General Spencer. Ms. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your indulgence. I regret that I wasn't able to be here earlier, but you all know how sometimes many commitments at the same time. I just want to follow up quickly because I think we all know that we have to translate all of this for not just our colleagues, but certainly for our constituents. And you've just talked about modernization and cited a few examples, and we know that these are funding requirements that are not part of OCO. They need to be sustaining over some time, and people sometimes think that, well, you're putting all this money in OCO, well, surely you'll be able to do everything that you need to do, and I think you've made the case very well this morning, I'm sure, and I appreciate the question, particularly that the chairman just asked. But could you, and you may have already done this, I'm thinking about skill sets, I'm thinking about the risk that we have to the men and women who serve our country. What is it about those skill sets, about the needs that we have, whether, you know, mental health to cyber or what have you, that puts our men and women at such risk that we need to really sound the alarm on this and exclaim that that is not something covered by OCO? How would you do that? And it's an elevator speech, obviously. You got about 2-sentence worth.
Congressman Davis, great to see you again, ma'am. Thanks. If
to
I
see you,
may,
General.
one of the
All
things
of
we
you.
did not discuss earlier, so this is really a topical question, is we talk about the cohesion of a unit and the leader-to-led ratio, and both of those are critically important. The world is a much faster place than it has been, and it's a much more complex place than it has been. And I think all of us have in other testimonies talked about the skill sets that our small unit leaders need. And consequently, not only the skill sets that those leaders need, but the stability that the unit and the other soldier, sailor, airman, marine deserves from having a skilled, trained leader at the helm. So with the OCO dollars, when we are paying for the current fight, the current reset, as opposed to reconstituting new gear, when we mortgage the modernization, we also mortgage, when we talk about home station training and we talk about modernized equipment, we reduce the capability to take that skilled leader and to train him or her on the equipment that we need, in the conditions that we need, with a number of what we call sets and reps we need, so that that leader is confident in his or her capabilities, and so that unit is confident in that leader. So I think in the future what we may see is services that are already kind of high demand, low density, but you may see a continued need to better train our leaders and perhaps age our force a little bit, because you have to get those skill sets. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I'll highlight another approach to this that we are working, and that is in order for us to ensure that the modernization programs that we have underway are better delivering the capability that our soldiers need, we're better linking our users with our developers and with our requirements writers, so that we get the reps with that equipment, and more importantly, we get the feedback on what that equipment can do and cannot do. And what it shows us is that some of our new equipment is very complex, and it does require increased training for our incredibly bright and energetic young soldiers. And we require I would say, a just enough technological edge. We don't have to make it so hard to train that the limited training time that we get creates challenges for our ability to integrate new capabilities. So we're trying to tighten that linkage because at the end of the day, a soldier that is confident and competent with the equipment that we provide them, because of the decisive edge of our leadership, they will dominate on the future battlefield. But we've got to give them the right equipment and the time to train on it to master it.
With a budget with OCO, you still have not removed the threat of sequestration. We have people who have lived through sequestration, and it is a dissatisfying experience. And there's a couple of cohorts that are very important to readiness. One, we don't often talk about them, but we've got these wonderful public servants who are repair workers, shipyard workers, aviation depot artisans, engineers, IT people. They are intrinsic to us maintaining readiness. And when we sequestered before, we furloughed those great public workers. And then when you want to, so some of them retire early, you lose those skill sets. It could take years for someone to go from apprentice to journeyman in order to be able to fix our ships or our aircraft. And then when we want to hire them back, they are deeply suspicious. These folks have to be able to earn a living and know that they can take care of their families and pay their mortgages just like anybody else. And for some of our engineers, it is their patriotism that lets them serve. They could have much greater rewards in the outside world. So they're that cohort. So if you don't take away the suspicion that we might sequester again, we create angst in that workforce, that civilian workforce. Then the impact of that sequestration, we are still dealing with an aviation depot backlog. That impacts the aircraft that we need to operate, but also for our officers, our pilots to be able to train in. So our folks have knowledge of what it's like to sequester. So OCO will help us in the immediate, but it won't take away the threat and the angst that comes with that law looming over our head. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Congressman, I guess if I was in an elevator and I only had a few seconds, I'd probably make it personal. And So I would describe it this way. I mean, I used to coach Little League football, and so our jobs is to organize, train, and equip to provide forces to combatant commanders. So as a football coach, I train the kids how to play. I would not send anyone into the game without a helmet or shoulder pads and knowing how to tackle or how to protect themselves. That's what we do. But if you look at that sort of in the military, that's not, OCO doesn't fund any of that. That's part of our base budget. If we have to get into the game or we have to go to war, that's when OCO kicks in because we have extra over and above expenses to our base. I think it's important to keep that differentiation so we understand what the differences are, and make sure we don't mix what goes in the base and what OCO is for. I just get worried when we do that. How do we, and then what happens when OCO goes away, and what happens to predictability and all the other things you've heard about here? I really worry about that.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that time.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis. We'll go to Mr. O'Rourke, and knowing that we have votes have been called at 9:48, so if you'll go ahead and ask your questions, we'll try to do that as quickly as we can so we can wrap up.
Let me just start by thanking each of you for your testimony today. I think you made an excellent case for the folly of our current budget trajectory and how that's going to impact readiness, and I think you've given us some of the facts that we need to help our colleagues make the right decision to ensure that we don't cut any further and that we support, our greatest asset and our greatest weapon, again, as General Paxton said, our men and women who serve this country in uniform. General Allen, you mentioned a 25% cut. I think you said that to modernization in the FY16 budget. Tell me what kind of impact that's going to have to, say, the Brigade Modernization Command at Fort Bliss under General Charlton, the NIE, the Network Integration Evaluation Exercises, and the upcoming Army Warfighting Assessment that will take place there. Will we be able to continue to do those things, or will we have to change those schedules and push those further out?
Thanks, Congressman O'Rourke. We have fully funded our Army Warfighting Assessment and our network integration exercise program. They are vital to us testing new capabilities and, more importantly, getting it into the hands of our brigade combat team that trains out there. As you know, those are joint exercises and those are multinational exercises. We've had a battalion of the Marines participate in the last two exercises. We've had our teammates from Canada, from Australia, from the United Kingdom train with us there, and they will train with us there in the future. So not only do we work on developing the modern capabilities we need, but we work on the concepts that will enable us to fight as a Force 2025 and beyond force that the future will require of us. And we're able to get a lot of interoperability work with our most critical allies. So it is fully funded. And General Charlton's leadership will remain critical to us achieving the objectives of that program.
So just a quick follow-up question. The 25% cut, what does that affect?
It primarily delays the procurement and acquisition of virtually every program that we have. So, we won't achieve balance under the President's budget until FY23. If sequestration comes back, it'll be 3 to 5 years longer than that. And that balance is people, modernization, and readiness.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. I just want to close by thanking all of our witnesses today. Thank you so much. I do want to end with a question, just a simple yes or no answer. Obviously, where we are today with the budget that passed, we have $96 billion additional dollars in OCO. In your perspective, understanding the long-term perspectives and the challenges that creates in funding that way, none of us like to do it that way. But if you put that in perspective of having that number now at $613 billion to authorize to and appropriate to versus the BCA levels, which of those is more preferable to each of you? General Allen?
Well, clearly, Congressman Whitman, increased money delivers increased capability and provides better training, readiness, and modernization. So, give us a choice of increased OCO or BCA. It's a simple answer.
Gotcha. Very good. Admiral Howard?
A bird in the hand is always worth more than the bush,
Yeah,
Congressman.
that's right.
But it's for the long term. It's not a good solution.
Great. Yeah, very good. General Paxton.
Yeah, absolutely. So the OCO dollars help in the short term. I continue to worry about the long term, our modernization, our training, and our exercises. We want to fight and win tonight and tomorrow, but we also want to make sure we don't do that at the expense of not being able to do it the day after tomorrow.
Exactly.
Thank you, sir.
General Spencer.
Same answer, Mr. Chairman. It's a patchwork, and we would hope going forward we could come up with a better solution, but same.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks for your service. Thanks for coming in today. Thanks for your candidness. We have our work cut out for us to not only look at what we're doing with the short-term budget perspective, but I agree with you all. We have to create some long-term certainty here, and that's up to all of us here to make sure that we're working together to get that done. Thank you for what you do. Please thank your soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen for the spectacular job they do for our nation, and thank their families, too, for the sacrifice that they make. Thank you so much. With that, subcommittee is adjourned.